Good morning, 11th grade. Man, I wish you all were here because I'd really love to start having a conversation about a lot of these art movements we're talking about right now. The closer we get, I mean, the 19th century, I get excited talking about these art movements because we're really coming up to our own era. These are things that really have implications for everything that's going on around us right now. So the last movement we talked about was Romanticism. And this one is realism. This is the realist movement in the 19th century. This is an event, by the way, that's taking place from about 1840 to about 1880. But there's a tremendous amount of overlap. A lot of the realist painters are also kind of included in other schools, you know. In a lot of people's opinion, the first modern art movement. Now, it may not look that way to you, but to people at the time, it had a lot of important sort of philosophical implications. So I want to start this out a little differently. First, by looking a little bit at a few different paintings and thinking about what they have in common. So I'll start off with a painting by Gustav Courbet. And then the next painting is by Jean-Francois Millet, and I'm sure you're familiar with his work. And the last one is by Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot. You may have noticed these guys are all French, which, you know, stands to reason. So these painters, look at those three paintings. And what's important about what they're doing is not so much how they're painting, although that plays into it too, but what they're painting. The realists rejected just about every sort of tradition that had come before, and this is why they're sort of a revolutionary movement and kind of the first modern art movement. They not only rejected the artistic movements before them, so they rejected the rationality of the neoclassical. They also rejected the emotionalism, the sentimentality of the Romantic painters. Some might say the emotional manipulation of Romantic painting. So what the realists would say was that it wasn't the style that these artists were painting in that was the problem. It was the sort of things that they were painting. Because the classicists and the romanticists and everybody had still always tended to paint, you know, things like Greek and Roman gods or scenes from history, kings and emperors and queens and all the great prophets. And to the realists, this missed the story of humankind. What they were interested in were common people and ordinary events, everyday life, right? This is what makes up the painting of the realists. And so they turn their attention to that in a sort of revolutionary way. And this all goes together with what's been going on since the Enlightenment, you know, with the American Revolution, the French Revolution. It's all a kind of democracy, right? It's all about the importance of the common man, the ordinary people. And so this is what realist painting is about. The painters chose subjects sometimes that were not pleasant or were ugly, and they thought it was important not to turn away from these things. So you get scenes from life where laborers are shown, scenes of slums and things like that, that they thought it was very important for people to see and think about. So they rejected painting any kind of high historical scenes or biblical scenes, people in togas and things like that. They thought that was all hopelessly out of touch with the real world. This turns out to be a very big influence on the Impressionists who come right after the realist movement. So realist painting lasts till about 1880, and Impressionism really starts in the 1870s, so there's quite a lot of overlap there. So again, three really important painters that we looked at: Courbet, Corot, Millet. There are some other important painters that we could classify as realist painters. I think John Constable, the Englishman, is in a lot of ways a realist painter. He rejected sort of the old compositional techniques that tried to make the landscape idealized and too pretty. He painted on location, as did Corot. Corot was a part of what they called in France the Barbizon school, along with Millet. And one of the things they did was to go out often and paint on location directly from life. And because they were working on location outdoors, they had to work quickly. So everything they did was wet paint. And they painted these very fast, very quick impressions of the landscape. And this was a new way of painting. Now, a lot of times they only did this as a study for a bigger painting. But over time, people came to see their quick sketches as important, as having a kind of artistic expression that was worth considering. And this also is a big influence on the first Impressionist painters. So I'll probably throw in a few other painters here at the end who might be considered realist painters. Realism in this sense doesn't mean high photographic detail, but it does mean looking at life in a realistic way, the sort of gritty realism where, you know, nothing is romanticized or idealized. So this is similar to some of the things we see even in kind of motion pictures and things of our own day.